The city was a relentless predator, its neon claws tearing through the fabric of the night. Elias gripped the steering wheel, the worn leather a familiar anchor in the storm of his own making. Every raindrop that slid down the windshield was a ghost of a past he was desperately trying to outrun, a world of whispered secrets and silent contracts, a world where he had been both a scholar and a weapon. He had studied the intricate machinery of human desire, the delicate architecture of fear, and the precise breaking point of a man's will. They called him the Ghost, a name earned in the shadows where empires were built and dismantled with a single, well-placed word. But the life of a phantom is a lonely one, and Elias was weary of haunting the gilded cages of powerful men. He was tired of the crushing weight of the truths he carried, truths that could shatter the fragile peace of the metropolis like a wrecking ball through a cathedral. He had seen the puppeteers and their strings, and he had severed every last one. Now, all he had was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with the forbidden knowledge that was both his life insurance and his death warrant. The city and the men who owned it wanted it back. They had unleashed their most formidable hunter, a man known only as the Curator, an artist of erasure who didn't just eliminate his targets, he expunged them from existence. Elias glanced at the journal on the passenger seat, its presence a tangible weight in the car. It was a fool's gambit, he knew, to believe he could simply walk away from a world that had its hooks so deep in his soul. But the alternative was a life of comfortable servitude, his mind a tool for men who saw him as nothing more than an asset. He had chosen freedom, even if it was the freedom of a man with a target on his back. The first forbidden truth was a fire in his mind, the very truth that had set him on this collision course. He had to get it out, to unleash it on a world sleepwalking through a meticulously crafted lie. He wasn't just running for his life. He was running to ignite a war for the minds of men. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the first shot was about to be fired. The city was a maze of steel and glass, and he was the rat. But this rat had teeth, and he was about to bite the hand that fed. The engine's low growl was his war drum, the rain his battle cry. The game was on, and Elias was no longer a piece to be played. He was the player, and he was about to make a move that would change the rules forever. The world thought it knew the truth. It was about to learn that the most dangerous truths are the ones that are hidden in plain sight. The neon signs bled into the rain-streaked glass, painting the world in hues of electric blue and blood red. Elias drove with a preternatural calm, his hands steady, his gaze fixed on the asphalt ribbon unwinding before him. He was a man adrift in a sea of sleeping souls, a shepherd trying to rouse a flock content in its slumber. The first truth, the one that had been his own violent awakening, echoed in the chambers of his mind. He had been a part of the machine, a cog so vital he had mistaken his function for freedom. He had been given wealth, access, the kind of power that could bend nations. But it had all been a leash, a very long and exquisitely gilded leash. The men he served, the architects of the modern age, they didn't rule with iron fists. They ruled with invisible threads, with the subtle manipulation of desire, with the carefully constructed illusion of choice. They had given him everything he thought he wanted, and in return, he had surrendered his mind. He remembered the day the illusion had shattered. He was in a boardroom suspended high above the city, the skyline a glittering tapestry at his feet. The men around the table, their faces etched with the casual arrogance of gods, were discussing the fate of a small nation. They spoke of resources, strategic advantages, acceptable losses. They spoke of human lives as if they were figures on a balance sheet. And in that moment, Elias saw it. The cold, calculating machinery of control, stripped bare of its patriotic platitudes and philanthropic justifications. He saw that he was not a partner in their enterprise, but a tool, a very sharp and effective tool, but a tool nonetheless. The realization was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. He had spent his life mastering the art of manipulation, only to discover that he was the ultimate subject of it. That was the first forbidden truth. You are a slave to the systems you have been taught to admire. The educational system that molds you into a compliant worker, not a critical thinker. The economic system that keeps you perpetually chasing a carrot on a stick. The social systems that dictate your values, your beliefs, your very sense of self. We are born into a world of pre-existing narratives, of inherited truths, and we spend our lives trying to live up to them, never questioning if they are our own. We are told to climb the ladder, but we never ask who built the ladder and where it leads. We are told to play the game, but we never question the rules or the prize. And the most insidious part of this prison is that its walls are invisible. We are its willing inmates, its unpaid guards. We police ourselves and each other, quick to ostracize anyone who dares to question the established order. Elias had dared to question, and now he was paying the price. He knew the curator would be on his trail, a relentless phantom who moved through the city's underbelly with a deadly grace. The curator was a product of the very system Elias was trying to expose, a man who had so thoroughly bought into the illusion that he had become its most fervent defender. He saw himself as a guardian of order, a necessary evil in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. He would see Elias as a heretic, a dangerous dissident who needed to be silenced before his ideas could spread like a contagion. And perhaps they were a contagion. The truth often is. It infects the comfortable lies we tell ourselves, the convenient fictions that allow us to sleep at night. It spreads from mind to mind, and once it takes root, it can topple empires. Elias had no illusions about his chances. He was one man against a global network of power, but he had one advantage. He knew their secrets. He knew their fears. And he knew that the most powerful weapon in the world is not a gun or a bomb, but an idea whose time has come. He turned the car onto a deserted industrial road, the city's glittering facade giving way to the grit and grime of its underbelly. This was where he would make his stand. This was where he would plant the first seed of doubt, the first crack in the prison wall. He had a message to send, a story to tell, and he knew there was an audience waiting, an audience of fellow prisoners who were beginning to rattle the bars of their own cages. They were the disaffected, the disillusioned, the ones who had played by the rules and found the game was rigged. They were the ones who suspected, deep in their hearts, that there was something fundamentally wrong with the world, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. Elias was about to put his finger on it. He was about to give them a name for their unease, a voice for their silent rebellion. He was about to share the first forbidden truth, and in doing so, he was about to become the most dangerous man in the world. He pulled the car to a stop in the shadow of a derelict warehouse, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. The fear was there, a cold knot in his stomach. But beneath the fear was something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. He was no longer a ghost, a whisper. He was a man with a voice, and he was about to make it heard. He opened the journal, its pages a testament to his own liberation. The time for silence was over. The time for truth had begun, and the world would never be the same. The second forbidden truth was a bitter pill, one that had taken Elias years to fully digest. It was a truth that stripped away the comforting layers of self-deception, leaving the soul raw and exposed. Your emotions are not your own. They are a weapon, and they are being used against you. He remembered his early days, his training, his indoctrination into the world of shadow and influence. He had been taught to read people, to understand their desires, their fears, their insecurities. He had learned to play on their emotions like a virtuoso on a violin, plucking the strings of their hearts to make them dance to his tune. He had become a master of emotional manipulation, and he had been proud of his skill. But he had never stopped to consider that his own emotions were being manipulated in the same way. The media, the politicians, the advertisers, the corporations, they were all masters of the same art. They sold us fear to make us compliant, outrage to make us divided, desire to make us insatiable consumers. They crafted narratives that triggered our deepest emotional responses, bypassing our rational minds and speaking directly to our primal instincts. We were a society drowning in a sea of manufactured emotion, and we had forgotten what it felt like to have a genuine feeling, an emotion that was truly our own. Elias had seen the A/B testing of news headlines, the careful selection of images designed to provoke a specific emotional response. He had seen the way political campaigns used fear and hope to herd voters like sheep. He had seen the way advertising created a sense of inadequacy that could only be soothed by the purchase of a product. It was a symphony of manipulation, and we were all dancing to its tune, believing we were moving to the rhythm of our own hearts. The Stoics of old understood this. They knew that the path to wisdom and freedom was through the mastery of one's own emotions. They taught that we should not be slaves to our passions, but their masters. They understood that the world could only control us if we allowed our emotions to be controlled. But in the modern world, this ancient wisdom had been forgotten, or worse, it had been co-opted by the very forces it was meant to combat. We were told to embrace our emotions, to follow our hearts, to trust our gut. But what if our hearts had been hijacked? What if our gut instincts were being programmed by an algorithm? Elias had come to realize that the only way to reclaim his emotional sovereignty was to become a stoic warrior in a world of emotional hysterics. He had to learn to observe his own emotions with a detached curiosity, to question their origin, to understand the external forces that were trying to provoke them. He had to create a space between the stimulus and the response, a space where he could choose how to feel, rather than being a puppet on an emotional string. This was a lonely path. It meant standing apart from the mob, refusing to be swept up in the latest wave of outrage or euphoria. It meant being the calm in the eye of the storm, the one who could see the bigger picture while everyone else was lost in the drama of the moment. It meant being accused of being cold, of being unfeeling, of not caring. But Elias knew that true caring was not about indulging in emotional theatrics. It was about seeing the world clearly, without the distortion of manufactured emotion, and acting with wisdom and courage. He thought of the curator, a man who was a slave to his own righteous indignation. The curator believed he was on a crusade for justice, but his sense of justice had been carefully crafted by his masters. He was a weapon, a tool of a system that he did not understand, and his emotions were the trigger that made him fire. Elias knew that to defeat the curator, he could not fight him on the same emotional battlefield. He had to rise above it, to a higher ground of reason and self-control. The rain had stopped and the city was quiet for a moment as if holding its breath. Elias knew the quiet would not last. The hunt was on and he was the prey, but he was not afraid. Fear was just another emotion, another tool that could be used against him. He would acknowledge it, he would respect it, but he would not be ruled by it. He was a rogue scholar, a stoic warrior, and he was armed with a truth that was more powerful than any weapon his enemies could muster. He was the master of his own mind, the captain of his own soul, and he would not be a slave to any man or any emotion. The second forbidden truth was his shield, and with it he was invincible. The third forbidden truth was the one that had separated Elias from the rest of the herd, the one that had marked him as a true outlier. It was a truth that was both terrifying and liberating, a truth that once embraced would change the very fabric of your reality. There is no good or evil. There is only power. From the moment we are born, we are taught a simple morality play. There are heroes and villains, good guys and bad guys, right and wrong. This binary view of the world is comforting. It gives us a sense of order, a moral compass to guide our actions. But it is a lie, a dangerous lie. Elias had seen firsthand that the men who were lauded as heroes were often the most ruthless, the most cunning, the most willing to do whatever it took to achieve their goals. He had seen that the men who were demonized as villains were often the ones who were simply on the wrong side of history, the ones who had lost the battle for the narrative. Good and evil were not objective realities. They were labels, assigned by the victors to justify their actions and condemn their enemies. The real driving force of the world was not morality, but power. The desire to acquire it, to wield it, to keep it. Every law, every institution, every social norm was a product of a power struggle. And the ones who were in power were the ones who got to define what was good and what was evil. They created the rules of the game, and they made sure the rules were stacked in their favor. To see the world in terms of power rather than morality was to see the world as it truly is. It was to strip away the veils of sentimentality and self-righteousness, and to see the raw, naked machinery of human interaction. It was to understand that people are not motivated by altruism or benevolence, but by their own self-interest. And that self-interest is always, at its core, a quest for power. The power to control one's own destiny. The power to influence others. The power to shape the world in one's own image. This was a dangerous truth. It could lead to cynicism, to nihilism, to a belief that nothing matters. But for Elias, it had been the opposite. It had been a liberation. If there was no preordained good or evil, then he was free to create his own values, to define his own code of conduct. He was no longer bound by the moral judgments of a society that he knew to be corrupt. He was free to act in his own self-interest, without guilt or shame. But this was not a license for wanton cruelty or destruction. It was a call to a higher form of self-interest, an enlightened self-interest. It was the understanding that the greatest power comes not from dominating others, but from mastering oneself. The power to control your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own actions. The power to be a cause, not an effect. The power to be the author of your own story, not a character in someone else's. This was the power that Elias was now seeking. He had walked away from the traditional trappings of power, the money, the influence, the status, because he had realized they were a trap. They were a form of external power, a power that could be given and taken away. The true power, the only power that mattered, was internal. It was the power that came from within, from the forging of a sovereign will. The curator, in his own way, understood this. He was a man who had dedicated his life to the acquisition of power, but his was a crude, brutal form of power. The power of violence, of intimidation, of fear. He was a hammer, and he saw every problem as a nail. He could not comprehend the kind of power that Elias was now wielding. The power of an idea, the power of the truth. Elias knew that the curator would come for him, and he knew that the encounter would be a clash of these two opposing forces. The old power versus the new. The power of the sword versus the power of the word. It would be a battle for the soul of the future, a battle to determine what kind of power would shape the world to come. And Elias was ready. He had shed the skin of his old self, the self that had been a servant of power. He was now a master of his own power, a rogue scholar who was about to rewrite the rules of the game. The third forbidden truth was his sword, and with it, he would cut through the lies and hypocrisy of the world. He was a warrior of the mind, and his battlefield was the human heart, and on that battlefield he would be victorious. The fourth forbidden truth was the one that truly set the Stoic warrior apart from the masses. It was a truth that required a radical shift in perspective, a complete reevaluation of what it means to be alive. Your suffering is your greatest strength. We are a culture that is obsessed with avoiding pain. We seek comfort, pleasure, and ease at every turn. We see suffering as something to be avoided, to be medicated, to be numbed. We have been taught that a good life is a life without pain. But this is a lie, and it is a lie that has made us weak. The Stoics knew that suffering is an inevitable part of the human experience. They did not try to avoid it. They embraced it. They saw it as a whetstone, a tool for sharpening the soul. They knew that it is only in the face of adversity that we can truly discover our own strength. It is only in the crucible of suffering that we can forge an unbreakable will. Elias had known his fair share of suffering. He had seen the dark side of human nature, the depths of depravity that men were capable of. He had carried the weight of secrets that would have broken a lesser man. He had lived a life of constant vigilance, of looking over his shoulder, of trusting no one. And for a long time he had seen this as a curse. He had longed for a simpler life, a life free from the burdens he carried. But then he had discovered the Stoics, and their teachings had been a revelation. He began to see his suffering not as a weakness, but as a source of strength. His pain had made him resilient. His paranoia had made him perceptive. His isolation had made him self-reliant. Every scar, every wound, every heartbreak had been a lesson, a training exercise for the warrior within. He had learned to transmute his suffering, to turn the lead of his pain into the gold of his wisdom. He had learned to use his fear as a compass, pointing him in the direction of his own growth. He had learned to use his anger as a fuel, propelling him to take action and create change. He had learned to use his sorrow as a teacher, deepening his compassion and his understanding of the human condition. This was a power that his enemies could not comprehend. They saw his suffering as a vulnerability, a weakness to be exploited. They would try to use his past against him, to trigger his old wounds, to break his spirit. But they would fail, because Elias was no longer a victim of his suffering. He was its master. He had integrated his shadows, he had made peace with his demons, and he had emerged from the fire stronger than ever before. He thought of the average person, the one who spends their life running from pain. They seek distraction in entertainment, in consumption, in the endless pursuit of fleeting pleasures. But their pain is always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce when their defenses are down. They are fragile, brittle, easily broken. They are a ship without an anchor, at the mercy of every storm. Elias was not that person. He was the storm. He had taken all the pain, all the suffering, all the darkness that had been thrown at him, and he had turned it into a source of indomitable power. He was a living embodiment of the fourth forbidden truth, a testament to the alchemical power of the human spirit. He knew that the path ahead would be filled with more suffering. The curator would not be an easy foe to defeat. The system he was fighting against would not go down without a fight. There would be pain, there would be loss, there would be moments of despair. But Elias was not afraid. He welcomed the challenge. He knew that every obstacle, every setback, every wound would only make him stronger. He was a rogue scholar, a stoic warrior, and his suffering was his shield, his sword, and his crown. He was the king of his own pain, the ruler of his own inner kingdom, and he would not be dethroned. The fourth forbidden truth was his anthem, and he would sing it in the face of any storm. The fifth forbidden truth was a dagger to the heart of the modern ego, a truth that shattered the carefully constructed identity that most people cling to for their sense of self-worth. You are not special. There is nothing about you that is inherently unique or deserving of praise. You are a collection of atoms, a fleeting moment in the grand cosmic dance, and in the grand scheme of things, you are utterly insignificant. This was a truth that Elias had struggled with for a long time. He had been a man of exceptional talent, a prodigy in the world of shadow and influence. He had been praised, admired, and feared. He had built an identity around his own specialness, his own unique abilities. He had believed that he was different from other people, that he was destined for greatness. But this belief had been a prison. It had made him arrogant, complacent, and blind to his own flaws. It had made him vulnerable to the flattery of others, and it had made him terrified of failure. His ego had been a fragile thing, a house of cards that could be toppled by the slightest breeze. It was only when he had lost everything, his status, his wealth, his reputation, that he had been forced to confront the truth of his own insignificance. He had been stripped bare, left with nothing but the raw, naked essence of his being. And in that emptiness, he had found a new kind of freedom. If he was not special, then he had nothing to prove. If he was not unique, then he had nothing to lose. He was free to be himself, without the pressure of living up to some grand, self-imposed image. He was free to act, to create, to live, not for the applause of others, but for the simple joy of the act itself. This was the paradox of the fifth forbidden truth. By embracing your own insignificance, you become truly powerful. You are no longer a slave to your own ego, to the need for validation, to the fear of judgment. You are free to move through the world with a lightness and a grace that is impossible for those who are weighed down by the burden of their own self-importance. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of one's fate. It was the acceptance of everything that is, without judgment or complaint. It was the understanding that you are a part of a much larger whole, a single thread in the vast tapestry of existence, and that your role is not to be the star of the show, but to play your part, whatever it may be, with dignity and with courage. Elias had embraced his fate. He was no longer trying to be a hero, a savior, a legend. He was simply a man who had seen the truth and who was trying to share it with others. He was a messenger, a conduit, a vessel for an idea that was much larger than himself. He knew that the curator would be a man who was deeply invested in his own specialness. The curator would see himself as a righteous warrior, a guardian of order, a man on a mission from God. His ego would be his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. He would be predictable, rigid, and easily manipulated. He would be a slave to his own self-image, and that would be his undoing. Elias, on the other hand, was a ghost, a whisper, a man with no name and no face. He had shed his old identity and he had not yet created a new one. He was a blank slate, a man in a state of becoming. He was fluid, adaptable, and unpredictable. He was a force of nature, a river that could not be dammed. The fifth forbidden truth was his invisibility cloak. It allowed him to move through the world unseen, to operate in the shadows, to be everywhere and nowhere at once. He was no one and therefore he could be anyone. He was nothing and therefore he could be everything. He was a rogue scholar, a stoic warrior, and his insignificance was his superpower. He was a humble servant of the truth, a nameless soldier in a war that had been raging since the dawn of time. And in his nothingness, he had found his all. The sixth forbidden truth was a declaration of war against the modern world, a truth that, if truly embraced, would make you an outlaw, a heretic, a dangerous dissident. Your comfort is your enemy. From the moment we are born, we are programmed to seek comfort. We are told that the goal of life is to be happy, to be safe, to be secure. We are sold a dream of a life without struggle, a life of ease and convenience. But this dream is a nightmare in disguise. The relentless pursuit of comfort has made us weak, soft, and fragile. We have become a society of overgrown children, unable to tolerate the slightest discomfort, unwilling to face the harsh realities of life. We have traded our strength for security, our resilience for pleasure, our freedom for a cage of our own making. Elias had lived in the gilded cage of comfort. He had had the money, the power, the access to every pleasure imaginable. He had lived a life that most people would kill for, but he had been miserable. The comfort had been a slow-acting poison, dulling his senses, sapping his will, and eroding his soul. He had been a lion in a zoo, well fed and well cared for, but a lion nonetheless. And a lion that has never had to hunt is no longer a lion. It was only when he had thrown it all away, when he had stepped out of the cage and into the wilderness, that he had truly come alive. He had chosen the path of discomfort, the path of uncertainty, the path of voluntary hardship. He had embraced the cold, the hunger, the fear. And in doing so, he had rediscovered the lion within. The Stoics understood the importance of this. They practiced voluntary hardship, deliberately exposing themselves to discomfort in order to build their resilience, to strengthen their will, to prepare themselves for the inevitable storms of life. They slept on hard floors, they ate simple food, they wore thin clothing in the cold. They were training for life, and they knew that life was a battle, not a vacation. This was a radical idea in a world that is obsessed with comfort. It was an idea that would be seen as crazy, as masochistic, as a form of self-harm. But Elias knew that the real self-harm was the slow, comfortable suicide that most people were committing. The suicide of a life unlived, of potential unrealized, of a spirit that had never been tested. To embrace discomfort was to choose to live. It was to choose to grow. It was to choose to be strong. It was to choose to be free. It meant seeking out challenges, taking risks, and pushing yourself to the limits of your own abilities. It meant finding the gym, not the couch. The cold shower, not the warm bath. The difficult conversation, not the comfortable silence. It meant being a warrior in a world of sheep. And that was a dangerous thing to be. The sheep do not like the warrior. The warrior reminds them of their own weakness, of their own cowardice, of their own wasted lives. They will try to pull the warrior down to make him one of them, to lull him back to sleep with the siren song of comfort. Elias had heard the siren song, and he had resisted it. He had chosen the path of the rogue scholar, the path of the Stoic warrior. He had chosen the discomfort of the truth over the comfort of the lie. He had chosen the hardship of freedom over the ease of slavery. He knew that the curator would be a man who was a creature of comfort. He would have his routines, his rituals, his creature comforts. He would be a man who was used to being in control, to having things his own way. And when things did not go his way, when he was forced out of his comfort zone, he would be weak, he would be vulnerable, he would be easy to break. Elias, on the other hand, was at home in the chaos. He had made discomfort his friend, his teacher, his ally. He was a man who had been forged in the fire of adversity, and he was as hard as steel. He was a weapon, and he was about to be pointed at the heart of the comfortable world that he had left behind. The sixth forbidden truth was his battle cry, and with it, he would shatter the fragile peace of a world that was sleeping on the edge of a volcano. He was the earthquake, the hurricane, the fire, and he was coming to wake the world up. The seventh and final forbidden truth was the most profound, the most liberating, and the most dangerous of them all. It was a truth that, once fully understood, would make you the master of your own destiny, the god of your own universe. Your death is your greatest gift. We are a culture that is terrified of death. We deny it, we hide from it. We do everything we can to pretend that it doesn't exist. We have sanitized death, removed it from our daily lives, and turned it into a taboo subject. But in our fear of death, we have forgotten how to live. The Stoics taught that the fear of death is the source of all our other fears. We are afraid of failure because we are afraid of the death of our ego. We are afraid of rejection because we are afraid of the death of our social standing. We are afraid of pain because we are afraid of the death of our physical body. But if we can conquer the fear of death, we can conquer all our other fears. We can become truly fearless. To meditate on your own death, to live each day as if it were your last, is not to be morbid or pessimistic. It is to be a realist. It is to understand that your time on this earth is finite, that every moment is precious, and that you should not waste a single second of it. It is to live with a sense of urgency, a sense of purpose, a sense of gratitude for the gift of life. Elias had stared death in the face many times. He had lived a life on the edge, a life where every day could have been his last, and it had been this proximity to death that had made him feel so alive. He had learned to appreciate the simple things, the taste of food, the warmth of the sun, the sound of the rain. He had learned to live in the present moment, to not dwell on the past or worry about the future. He had learned to live and to love and to fight as if there were no tomorrow. This was a power that his enemies could not comprehend. They were men who were clinging to life, who were terrified of losing their wealth, their power, their status. They were men who were playing a game of accumulation, trying to hoard as much as they could before the inevitable end. But they were already dead. They were the walking dead, the zombies of the modern world, their souls already rotting away in their comfortable coffins. Elias was not one of them. He had died to his old self, to his old life, to his old fears. He had been reborn, and he was now living a second life, a life on his own terms. He was a man who had nothing to lose, and therefore he was a man who could risk everything. He was a true Stoic warrior, a man who had made death his advisor, his confidant, his friend. He knew that the curator would be a man who was terrified of death. He would be a man who was clinging to his own life, to his own sense of self-importance. He would be a man who would do anything to avoid the void, to postpone the inevitable. And in his fear of death, he would be a slave to life. He would be a man who could be controlled, who could be manipulated, who could be broken. Elias was a free man. He had accepted his own mortality, and in doing so, he had become immortal. His body may die, but his ideas, his courage, his spirit would live on. He was a part of something larger than himself, a link in a chain that stretched back to the dawn of time and forward into the endless future. He was a rogue scholar, a Stoic warrior, and his death was his ultimate weapon. He was a man who was not afraid to die, and therefore, he was a man who was truly free. And a free man is the most dangerous thing in the world. The seventh forbidden truth was his legacy, and he would write it in the stars. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows and silence, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. Elias moved through the darkness with a predator's grace, his senses alive, his mind a razor-sharp instrument. He had chosen this place for a reason. It was a place of forgotten things, a graveyard of broken dreams. It was the perfect stage for the final act of his rebellion. He knew the curator would come. He had left a trail, a series of breadcrumbs that only a man of the curator's peculiar talents could follow. It was a trap, of course, but it was also an invitation to a conversation, a final reckoning between two opposing worldviews. He found a spot in the center of the vast, empty space and sat down, crossing his legs in a meditative posture. He placed the journal in front of him, its leather cover a dark pool in the faint moonlight that streamed through the grimy windows. He closed his eyes and began to breathe, long and slow, centering himself, gathering his strength. He was not preparing for a fight. He was preparing for a seduction. He was going to seduce the curator with the truth, to plant a seed of doubt in the fertile ground of his dogmatic certainty. He did not have to wait long. He heard a sound, a faint scrape of a shoe on concrete, a disturbance in the stillness of the night. He opened his eyes and saw a figure emerge from the shadows, a tall, gaunt man with a face that was a mask of cold, professional detachment. It was the curator. He held a gun in his hand, but he did not raise it. He simply stood there, studying Elias with an unnerving intensity. "You've led me on a merry chase, Elias," the curator said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I have to admit I'm impressed. Not many people have the courage to do what you've done." "Courage has nothing to do with it," Elias replied, his voice calm and steady. It's simply a matter of seeing things as they are, and once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. The truth, the curator scoffed, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. You talk of the truth as if it's some kind of a revelation. But the truth is, Elias, that the world is a dark and dangerous place, and it needs men like us to keep the monsters at bay. You, of all people, should know that. I know that the monsters are not at the gate, Elias said, his gaze unwavering. The monsters are in the boardroom. They're in the halls of power. They're the ones who create the chaos, who profit from the fear, who feed on the suffering of others. And we, my friend, we have been their guard dogs. The curator's jaw tightened. You've been listening to the wrong voices, Elias. You've been corrupted by your own arrogance. You think you're better than the system, that you're above it all. But you're just another self-righteous fool who thinks he can save the world. I'm not trying to save the world, Elias said, a faint smile playing on his lips. I'm trying to free it, and the first step to freedom is to realize that you are in a prison. He gestured to the journal in front of him. This is not a weapon, curator. It's a key. It's a map to a world beyond the walls of our own conditioning. A world where we are not slaves to our emotions, where we are not puppets of power, where we are not afraid of our own suffering. A world where we are the masters of our own minds, the captains of our own souls. The curator took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the journal. You're a dreamer, Elias, a dangerous dreamer, and I am the one who has to wake you up. He raised the gun, his aim steady. But Elias did not flinch. He simply looked at the curator, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of pity and compassion. You can kill me, Elias said, his voice a soft, hypnotic whisper. But you can't kill an idea, and the idea that I have planted in the world tonight is already starting to grow. It's a seed of doubt, a spark of rebellion, a whisper of freedom, and it will spread, curator. It will spread like a wildfire, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. For a long moment, the two men stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The gun was a cold, hard reality between them, but the real battle was being fought in the realm of ideas, in the space between their two minds. And then something shifted in the curator's eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, a crack in the mask of his professional detachment. He had spent his life in the shadows, a man of action, not of words. He had always believed in the simple, brutal logic of violence. But Elias was offering him something else, something more powerful than any gun. He was offering him a new way of seeing the world, a new way of being a man. The curator lowered the gun, his hand trembling slightly. He was a man on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss of his own making. And for the first time in his life, he did not know what to do. Elias smiled. He had won. He had not defeated the curator with force but with reason. He had not killed his body, but he had awakened his mind. He had planted the seed, and now it was up to the curator to let it grow. The choice is yours, my friend, Elias said, his voice gentle. You can continue to be a guard in a prison that you don't even know you're in, or you can join me. You can join the revolution. You can become a rogue scholar, a Stoic warrior, a man who is truly free. He stood up and picked up the journal. He walked past the curator, who was still standing there, frozen, his mind reeling from the encounter. Elias did not look back. He knew that he had left a part of himself in that warehouse, a part of his story, a part of his soul. But he had also taken something with him, a new sense of hope, a new sense of purpose, a new sense of what it means to be a man. He walked out into the night, the city lights glittering in the distance. The world was still a dark and dangerous place, but now there was a new light in the darkness, the light of the truth, the light of the rogue scholar, the light of the Stoic warrior, and that light would never be extinguished. Do you feel it? That stirring in your soul, that whisper of discontent, that longing for something more, that is the sound of your own chains rattling in the prison of your mind. You have been a sleeping giant, a lion in a cage, a god who has forgotten his own divinity. But tonight, you have been awakened. The 7 forbidden truths have been unleashed, and they have shattered the foundations of your world. This is not the end. It is the beginning of your own rebellion, your own revolution, your own journey from the darkness of conformity to the light of self-mastery. The path will not be easy. The world will try to pull you back, to lull you back to sleep with its empty promises of comfort and security. Your own inner demons will rise up to challenge you, to test your resolve, to tempt you with the familiar embrace of your old self. But you are not alone. You are a part of a new tribe, a new community of rogue scholars and Stoic warriors who are rising up to reclaim their minds, their souls, and their destiny. We are the ones who are not afraid to ask the hard questions, to challenge the established order, to walk the path less traveled. We are the ones who are forging a new world, a world of courage, of wisdom, of freedom. So I ask you, will you join us? Will you pick up the sword of your own will and fight for the kingdom of your own mind? Will you embrace the glorious struggle of becoming the man you were always meant to be? If the answer is yes, then your journey has just begun. There is more to learn, more to discover, more to become. Subscribe to this channel, join our community, and continue your training. The next lesson is coming, and it will take you deeper into the heart of the Stoic warrior's path. But for now, I want you to do one thing. Look in the mirror, look into your own eyes, and for the first time in a long time, see the person who is staring back at you. See the giant, see the lion, see the god, and make a promise to that person. A promise to never go back to sleep. A promise to live the rest of your life as a warrior. A promise to be free. The world is waiting for you. Your destiny is calling. The time for hesitation is over. The time for action is now. Go forth and be dangerous. Go forth and be free. Go forth and be the master of your own fate. The rogue scholar has spoken. The Stoic warrior has awakened. And the world will never be the same. The revolution has begun, and you are at its heart. Welcome to the MidQuest Chronicles. Welcome to the rest of your life.